nobody knows how this is going to play out, just how long this is going to last. But you, as a CEO, have to be making your models and have to be making certain assumptions about what the economy is going to look like 3-6 months from now. What is your sort of operating assumption in terms of how long this lasts and how long it gets for the tech economy and the economy at large?
I think you're totally right. It is way too early to make any sort of pronouncements, and anyone that tells you otherwise is just trying to make things up as they go along, just like I am. That said, it's important to prepare. My assumption, or our operating assumption, has been that there'll be a fairly severe shock in a very short term, as literally millions of people suddenly find themselves furloughed or unemployed and things like that. And so that's what you have to be prepared for. And the flip side is that prior to the crisis, the economy was generally thriving. The state of employment was extremely fully employed, and the banks and other forms of capital sources were very well capitalized ever since the '08 crisis. And so in general, the state of the country is healthy. We're experiencing a literally grinding down to a halt. But my current operating theory is that as we get control of the virus and figure out how to operate in the new normal, the recovery will be relatively swift. That said, I think it's important to prepare for the eventuality that the damage the virus shutdown does to us is so significant that it takes longer to restart. But bottom line is, I think it's going to hurt for a while in the beginning, and then it's going to recover, and it's probably going to recover reasonably fast.
Now, President Trump extended social distancing guidelines until at least the end of April. We spoke to Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield last week. He said it could be as many as 6 months before his employees, go back to work in the office full time. I mean, how long do you think your employees will be out of the office for, and what are you preparing for?
You know, we've been very lucky in a sense that just to give you a sense, it's very difficult for a highly regulated company like Fern to go into work from home mode. And my team, both our IT and operations teams, just stepped up and moved mountains to allow a large multi-office company go from very comfortable distance in our multi-city offices into entirely working from home. At this point, we're very prepared to stay in this mode modulo the social difficulty. It's lonely to work out of your spare bedroom. But that said, I think we're prepared to go as long as it takes. And I'm certainly a big believer in the social distancing as a way of flattening the curve. So in that sense, if we must stay at home longer, so we will, just to make sure that fewer people die and fewer people have to go into the hospitals. And so in that sense, I think we're quite prepared.
Max, I want to talk to you a little bit about how the president has handled this crisis, because as of yesterday, he was looking at Easter as a sort of optimistic reopening of the economy date. Then he extended it to the end of the month. I'm curious how that impacts you as a CEO when you're trying to make the decisions and forecast out just how long your workforce is going to have to be working from home. How the president's sort of mixed messaging impacts how you run the company.
Fundamentally, we have to read all the different signals concurrently. Probably the single most important authority, government officials that are governing my San Francisco office are California state officials, Governor Newsom, all the folks in California that set our local policy. I think that's, and same thing goes for our offices in New York and Pittsburgh and Chicago and Salt Lake City. And so I think that's the, beginning and the end of it. Each state has a different situation, and as we know, New York is extremely complex right now. California seems like it's doing a little bit better, et cetera. My guess is that the president has to balance his optimism and desire for quick return to work with the realism of all of his advisors and the reality of the situation. So my guess is these dates will get revised and hopefully move in the right direction. That's kind of what matters. We have to be prepared to do our work from home for as long as it takes. The most important thing, the worst mistake we can possibly make is to say, oh, surely we're going to be back in our offices by date X, and therefore this or that can be postponed or not get done. We're certainly not doing anything of the sort. We're assuming that we're going to be prepared for the worst, and we're certainly hoping for the best like everyone else.
Now, Affirm offers financing alternatives to credit cards, and you have an interesting view on just how consumers are behaving right now, how this is all impacting merchants. What sort of trends are you seeing? Are you seeing people missing payments? Are you seeing less spending in general, especially on discretionary items, as folks have their hours cut, lose their jobs, and are generally facing this tremendous uncertainty going forward?
It's fascinating. Certainly not for the faint of heart, but to somebody who manages a financial services company, especially one that deals with risk every day, this is a fascinating time to do work, although terrifying time as well for all the obvious reasons. We're seeing all kinds of really interesting changes. It's a little bit too early to tell what's going to happen with delinquencies and defaults and payments. We are seeing significant amount of interest from consumers about, hey, what will happen to my bills? What if I'm late? And the message that we have the privilege and the pleasure to deliver is Affirm has never charged late fees, never in our history, with billions of dollars lent, we've never collected a penny of fees of any kind, and no late fees either. And so our consumers are protected. If they chose to use Affirm to purchase things, they can be sure that we will work with them to make sure that they are able to make their, as much as we can help them, we will help them meet their obligations. In terms of consumer trends, spending trends, all sorts of really fascinating things are happening. As you might predict, overall consumer spending, we are seeing it slow down. Things like fashion, things like truly discretionary purchases are sharply down. Travel is in pain, to put it bluntly. On the flip side, things that make your home office better, things that make you more productive, things that make you feel like you're not trapped inside your apartment or inside your house are on the upswing. People are buying things that help you stay fit, things that help you work standing up, bigger monitors, you name it. There's all sorts of demand for those things, and they're surging to the point where they're significantly faster growing. The demand is growing faster than anything we've seen or expected. There's also a fair amount of general merchandise that people are buying. I think part of it is hoarding, unfortunately. Part of it is just being ready for further lockdowns or lockdowns that haven't hit them yet. But there's all sorts of movement both in up and downward directions in consumer demand.
So how do you then plan to adapt and adjust Affirm and the policies that you have as this progresses, again, not knowing what the end looks like with no end in sight?
I think our mission is simple. We try to make sure that we are there to help our consumers and our merchant partners do business. When folks choose to use us to buy whatever is going to help them stay sane or productive during their work from home period, we need to make sure they know we're reliable, we're there. We won't charge them late fees. We will work with them to make sure that they have the personalized solution that comes to expect. We're there to help our merchants sell the things that they want to sell, that there's demand for during this downturn. We have to be thoughtful and make sure that we understand how the job losses and how all the changes the economy is going to see in the short and the long term will impact our consumers' ability to pay. But we also know that right now is when credit is most necessary. That's when people are starting to budget and try to figure out what can they stretch. Every dollar needs to go longer, and that's what the function of a company like Affirm is. And so we are responsive every single day to everything from the Federal Reserve announcements to our merchants putting things on sale that they know they're trying to help people get. The advantage that we have is our ability to respond to data that we see in real time. One of the premises of companies like Affirm is our ability to say, things are changing. The stimulus that was just announced is an entirely new sort of X factor that I think everybody expected, but no one knows exactly what it's going to do. Our job is to monitor the numbers and adapt to it.
Now, Max, you and your former PayPal colleagues have always inspired great fascination. Elon Musk has been very out front with his thoughts on the coronavirus, initially saying that the panic was dumb and that children are immune, which is actually, in fact, not true. That said, he has also vowed to work on making ventilators to help. And I'm curious what your take is on his sort of initial skepticism, at least, given this whole idea that Silicon Valley often thinks it can do better than everyone else when it comes to finding solutions.
No, I think everyone who has made fun of this thing as just a tougher flu or silly problem is going to go away with the first ray of sunshine is probably slightly embarrassed by those comments, and that excludes no one. I think it's just a great illustration how it is really, really hard for human beings to understand exponential growth. Like, even if you've been in Silicon Valley your entire life and you watched viral spread of the social media kind grow from nothing to everything, it is still just incredibly difficult to internalize this idea that yesterday we saw 1 or 2 infections, today we're seeing hundreds and fully expect more. And it's just staggeringly difficult to imagine that speed of growth. That said, I think on the negative side, you have a bunch of people that say, I'm no doctor or epidemiologist, but step aside, I'm smart, I can do better. I think that's hubris and probably mostly unjustified, especially unjustified in situations like this virus. On the other hand, you do have this spirit of Silicon Valley, and it extends beyond the physical Silicon Valley, where when given direction or when given a good idea, we know how to mobilize and inspire and just go through walls and build things. And so in that sense, I think if Elon is committing to build ventilators, by God, he's going to build a lot of ventilators, and they're probably going to be quite good, and he's going to go through walls to make sure this happens. So in that sense, I think that's a wonderful thing that not just Elon, but all the industry now stepping behind these efforts to support the country. I think that's just a good thing at all.